MIT, Harvard, and University of Pennsylvania about what is considered acceptable speech on campus. The video of her questioning went viral. And since then, Penn's president, Elizabeth McGill, has stepped down. There's pressure on Harvard's president, Claudine Gay, and there is a lot of discussion around this issue. What is going on campus? Are the universities being hypocritical, as it seems to be the case? This is New Idea Live. I'm Elan Journo. Joining me is Onkar Ghate. Welcome, Onkar.
Hi, Elan. Sorry, I'm on the road in the hotel, so I don't have the best lighting.
It's good to have you. Let's talk about the deeper issues here, because a lot of people are talking about this as hypocrisy. I think the important thing to establish first is just the severity of the issue. And I think the fact that this has risen to headline level is some evidence of that. And of course, since October 7th, there have been protests on campuses nationwide. And many of the students and sometimes faculty are there shouting slogans that are by now familiar: from the river to the sea, intifada, globalized intifada. And I think the theme of these protests is, I think, an attack on Israel, blaming Israel for its own suffering. And sort of the hallmark of this, or not the hallmark, but what set the tone for this kind of reaction was an infamous letter originated at Harvard from more than 30 student groups on October the 8th, which leveled exclusive blame on Israel's government and policies for the attack and atrocities of Hamas, which I think many people reacted to rightly as a moral inversion. And since then, there have been donors from various universities pulling back their support because of what they see on campus. I think the universities are in a crisis mode, and so this sort of is the context for these hearings. I think what would be good to do is just to hear a couple of the clips that went viral to get a flavor of what was discussed at this 3+ hour hearing on Capitol Hill. Why don't we play the first clip?
Ms. McGill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
I am asking, specifically calling for the genocide of Jews, does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is depending upon the context. That is not bullying or harassment. This is the easiest question to answer yes, Ms. McGill.
So there you have part of what the issue is, as it's seen. There are university codes for what is acceptable speech. Then there's the First Amendment, which governs everyone in the country. And there's a concern that the universities are not enforcing their codes or enforcing them selectively. And that is sort of the genesis of the claim that there's hypocrisy here. And we'll delve into that a bit more. I think we want to identify at least two threads here. One is this issue of the speech codes and the issue of free speech on campus. And the other one is what's driving this reaction from the university. So let's hear the other clip, which I think is further evidence that people present for thinking that there's a double standard or a hypocrisy here.
Ms. Stefanik, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Dr. Gay, a Harvard student calling for the mass murder of African Americans is not protected free speech at Harvard, correct?
Our commitment to free speech...
It's a yes or no question. Is that corrected? Is that okay for students to call for the mass murder of African Americans at Harvard? Is that protected free speech?
Our commitment to free speech
It's a yes or no question.
Okay, very, very strained and challenging. And I think that's the most dramatic of the whole 3+ hours of the hearings. Onkar, let's talk about these two strands here and figure out which one is the more significant, more essential. So there's the issue of, is this a free speech issue, as many people are saying? Is it part of the concerns about speech codes? And then the other strand here is the kind of motivation behind what seems like the double standard or the hypocrisy. How do you think of this? Do you think of this as primarily a free speech issue or a speech code issue?
Yeah, I don't think this is essentially a free speech issue. And some of the people talking about it as it's a hypocrisy, a double standard, will, I think, identify this, that it's at most what the university presidents are doing is hiding behind the free speech and we've got a free speech code on campus, so we can't do anything about these students. chanting for the destruction or death of Jews, destruction of Israel. And it may well be, I mean, these are private universities, but it's a complex story about why they have, people think that there's free speech on these campuses, and the administrations and their codes often talk about, we try to have maximum free speech on our campuses. So that is an issue, but it's that they're hiding behind it. And when it's protests against things that they think are good, and so they think something's wrong with the protest, then it's because, well, we need safe spaces on campus and we have to protect people, and they don't resort to, oh, but we've got free speech, so I guess we have to let this go on our campuses. And if it descends to the level of conduct and actual harassment of specific students or intimidation of specific students, then we would do something. So it's that the bar is so much lower when it's protesters protesting against something that the administration thinks is, well, that's good, you shouldn't be protesting against it. But the real question, I think, is there really a double standard here? Or is it that people are not understanding what their actual standards are? And I think part of the reason that the free speech issue is not the essential here. What shocked people, I mean, you were talking about the protests right after the October 7th massacre in Israel. Over 1,000 people died in horrific ways. And I think what shocked people is not how can the university allow these protests to happen? It's that the protests are happening. It's that the students want to protest. And as you said, like 30 different student organizations at Harvard, their immediate response is, well, Israel is solely to blame for this attack. That's their viewpoint. And so it's not an issue of, well, how can they be free to express their viewpoint? It's how can this be their viewpoint? And they're coming to one of the leading schools in the nation, Harvard, and maybe they come into the school with these kinds of views. But how can they be at the school for years and this remains their view? That's what is galvanizing people, and that people are really surprised by, to put it mildly, that really there could be this many people on our leading campuses who think this.
In another podcast, we talked about the rise and resurgence of anti-Semitism across the culture, both on campuses and on the streets and in the culture generally. And that's obviously the issue that was on the table at the hearings that we were just seeing clips from. And I want to zoom out a bit and talk about what is it that, so you're saying this isn't a double standard. There's something here that explains the fact that when Jewish students or Israeli students are harassed on campus, that the fact that universities don't step in, or that they tolerate it, or that they turn a blind eye, or that they regard this as not a group that deserves safe space, they deserve to be sort of protected in the way that other groups are. And there's a whole apparatus on campus to make students feel included and to ensure there's diversity and things like that. That the students who, and I think that a lot of Israelis and Jewish students are saying, well, why aren't we protected? Why are we excluded from this? And so the conversation we had about anti-Semitism is that's not an exception, but rather an expression of the underlying values here. And that the sort of October 7th has pulled the lid off what's really going on campus, and what are the ideas that are shaping people's minds at the best universities, and I think it trickles down. So maybe one way to talk about this is sort of an essentialization, is that in an important way, of all the minority students on campus, and there are so many now, and sort of it's multiplying, what is it about the Jews or the Israelis that make them excluded from consideration? Why do they not matter from the perspective of this framework that is so prevalent on campuses, which is, the way I think of it is, it's geared towards finding victims who need to be protected or need to be elevated in some way. And so here's a group that isn't included in that. Why do you think they're not included in that? Why are they seen as no longer significant, worthy of attention?
It's essentially because they've succeeded. That when you look, and if you look, you think of the World War II and the Holocaust, and attempt to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth. It didn't succeed, but it killed millions and millions and millions. And despite that, the Jews have been successful in all kinds of countries, including in the US. So it's often remarked how wealthy and well educated and so on they are. And it's often you're looking at people who've come, either they fled Nazi Germany or they've survivors of the Holocaust. And they're then able to build a life and a successful legacy, in effect, in, say, in America. But then if you look at Israel, part of the whole history of Israel is it's coming out of nothing. It's people fleeing to there. Often they're not either allowed in or welcomed in other countries. So they establish Israel, and it starts off as it's poor, relatively backward. You wouldn't think of it as like a leading Western nation, technologically advanced or anything like that at its founding. And it has sympathy when it's people view it as just, well, here's a sort of a refuge for victims. They were so badly persecuted, and now they have, in effect, like a safe space. But once they start succeeding, then the world evaluation and world opinion turns first sort of indifferent to them and then against them. And one has to really face that. I think it's just a fact that that is what happened. And one has to face the issue of why did that happen? Like, what is a proper analysis of that? And if one thinks, I think, properly about that, it reveals a very evil motivation and an evil standard. But it's not a double standard. In fact, it's their standard is who's entitled to moral significance, moral concern. It starts off as the victim, but what that really means is it's the person who lacks something. They're entitled to kind of moral rewards, and the person who doesn't lack. But what that really means in the end is the person who produces, earns, creates. That person doesn't have a right to what they produce, earn, create. They're supposed to give it up for the people who didn't produce it, who don't earn it, who didn't create it. And if you take that's the essence of the morality we've been taught. This is what Ayn Rand calls as the morality of altruism, or the morality of self-sacrifice, or in Atlas Shrugged, she'll call it, it's the morality of death. Because when you start to create, produce, earn, you lose any moral significance, moral regard. And when you don't produce, earn, create, then you're entitled to all kinds of moral concern. And that puts on the side of the people who are on the side of life, production, creation, earning, building. They don't count. They are to just sacrifice for the people who don't. That is a morality that is geared towards death.
I want to pick on something you raised there, which is that sometimes it's thought of as there's an orientation to the victims in a given case. And the way a lot of people might argue the point is, well, the Palestinians are victims here. Now, I don't think that's true historically, and I don't think it's true in the contemporary situation, but it's a way in which this is masked to some degree. And that the point I wanted to press on is that what you're describing is a view that isn't concerned with actual responsibility for the fact that you lack something. It's the fact that you lack it, and particularly if you haven't achieved something, if you haven't taken the steps to do it. So when we think of a victim, it's often, does the person bring any of this on themselves? Do they have any role in their suffering, or did they not have any role? So there's an innocent victim, and the victim that has some responsibility, of full responsibility for what their position is. That is not a part of it's not part of this calculation that you're describing. In fact, it's precisely those who haven't taken the steps to improve their situation that are considered more significant than those who've taken steps to improve their situation. So there's a real moral inversion, and it detaches people's actions from what they deserve to have. So I think there's a deep way in part of what Ayn Rand's analysis of altruism brings out is that in a deep way, this is fundamentally at odds with how to think about justice and desert and who actually warrants your consideration. So it's a real flipping of what a rational perspective would be. So as you put it, it's insofar as people achieve something, that's why they don't count, and they never count. They can never do anything right. And insofar as they don't, or they do things that are actually evil, that's to the extent to which they do count and they are elevated. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, and the viewpoint, one way to put it is the viewpoint that has emerged in the last 50 years as the dominant moral viewpoint is altruism undisguised. And part of what it means that it's undisguised is it's notes that the victim is innocent and is suffering because of the machinations of evil forces. And what egalitarianism says is that who's entitled to concern, I mean, this was Rawls' whole view, who's entitled to concern is the least deserving, the least well-off, the poorest. You can't ask any question of why are they the least well-off? Why aren't they doing well? Is it because they can't bother to get up in the morning and try to find a job? So you can't ask any question like that. The mere fact that they're at the bottom, they are entitled to the most moral concern. And the people who produce, achieve, they don't really earn what they do. None of them. They don't earn it. They don't deserve it. They're going to be sacrificed for the least deserving. And it was put as, this is the theory of justice. That's what it's. It's a theory of injustice. It's systematic injustice. Or you could put it, it's anti-justice. You're no longer to think who deserves their fate, because there's no such thing as really deserving your fate. And it's only, you take the people who have ability, who've achieved something, and so on, they're to minister to the people who have not achieved anything. That was the whole program. And that it first took over in philosophy departments and in sort of the humanities as the new moral view. And it has now seeped across the universities. And this is what they learn in their classes, and not just philosophy classes. In basically every class that deals with moral issues, they learn in one way or another this egalitarian framework. And it's a framework that's anti-justice.
Just tying this back to what students learn on campus, and the point we're developing here is that there isn't hypocrisy. What you're seeing, in fact, is the naked essence of the ideas that students have been taught for many, many decades and that are dominant in academia. One way to concretize this issue, that this isn't really a concern with innocent victims. This isn't a concern with justice. It's the negation of justice. So when you think about the students who are chanting from the river to the sea and globalize the intifada and all those pro-Hamas statements, in effect, there's a number of things to say. One, I don't think most of those students really know what they're talking about. And if they did, they would, I imagine some of them are honest enough to question, am I really in favor of destroying a prosperous, basically free country? Am I really in favor of killing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people? I think many of them probably, if they really understood it, they would say no. I think they're better than that. But the other thing that comes up here is if you had a genuine concern for Palestinians, and there are Palestinians who are not aligned with Hamas, who are not aligned with the other factions of the Palestinian movement, who would rather live in freedom. I think there are definitely people like that. If you had a real concern for them, what you would be chanting is not the slogans of those who are dominating them and exploiting them as human shields and exploiting them as tools to extract international aid from the rest of the world, and then leaving them in misery and leaving them on the streets to be cannon fodder. You would advocate for the eradication of those who are tyrannizing them, the Hamas and the other factions of the Palestinian movement. If you really cared about Palestinians, you would want them to truly be free, not to continue to live under the domination of the factions that have been in power so long. And then, in effect, what these slogans are doing is whitewashing Hamas and presenting, and more than that, they're actually explicitly talking about this. Some of the students are talking about this as justified resistance. Now, none of that is true. That's an abomination. But if you really cared, if your values really were oriented to what would be a better life for Palestinians, none of what they're saying is what you would say. It's completely the opposite of what you would really be concerned about. And this issue of, and I think this is partly masked and partly evaded. I think that there's really a confusion in some parts with some students, and I don't think there is with most of the faculty who are pushing it. But that issue is, I think, it goes to the heart of what altruism is. So there's many misconceptions about what altruism teaches and what it implies. But I think Ayn Rand's account, as we've been talking about, it is not truly concerned with people. It is not truly concerned with lessening the burden on people who are suffering for no fault of their own. It really is an orientation to zero. It's an orientation to lack. And in effect, it provides a blank check, or there are many metaphors for how to capture this, but it provides an incredible tool for rationalizing evil and for not being concerned with actual victims. And so this is another version of the point that it's anti-justice. And I'm interested in your perspective on the fact that, or the claim that I'm making, that no one who truly cares about Palestinians, or about Israelis for that matter, could honestly, if they understood what they're talking about, could honestly mouth these slogans and advocate for the Palestinian cause to succeed, because it has been so detrimental to Palestinians themselves.
Certainly, that means pre-October 7th, that if you thought of yourself as, look, I'm for more freedom and more justice for Palestinians, you should be, and should have been, pre-October 7th, anti-Hamas. That and from its rise to the Western powers, including, unfortunately, we in the US, helping Hamas get elected, to them then driving out political opponents and establishing a dictatorship. This is what you should have been protesting. You should have been protesting it for years, and protesting the governments, including Western governments, that turn a blind eye or actively helped Hamas gain and keep power. Like, if you are actually pro any Palestinians, any individual Palestinians who want to live a better life and want to live in more freedom and have more justice, you would have been for years anti-Hamas. And what happened on October 7th would have just confirmed that they're killers and butchers and they're dictators. But it's not like you needed October 7th to know that. And this essentially has nothing to do with Israel. That if you're really pro-Palestinians, that is, individual Palestinians seeking a better life, then you have to be pro a leadership that is actually pro-freedom, and you have to be anti-leaderships, secular or religious, whether it's the PLA or Hamas, who are wannabe dictators or actual dictators. And if you're on their side, or you look the other way of what they do, then you can't hold yourself as you're on the side of freedom, of justice, of a better life for Palestinians. And that's so startlingly absent of that there's had been that kind of protest. I mean, we at ARI protested that our American government is helping Hamas get into power, that this is, it's destructive to our self-interest, but it's enormous injustice to anybody who's on the side of freedom and prosperity. But anybody of these protesters, if that wasn't their orientation, they can't hold themselves as pro-freedom.
I think it would be useful to expand the discussion to include things wider than the Israeli-Palestinian issue, although that's the main issue that's going on, activating students on campus in the protests that we've been talking about. But for the point is that the kind of value standard, or the kind of inverted moral thinking that we've been discussing, this altruistic perspective, that the way it corrupts thinking and the way it corrupts people's ability to think morally. This is evident in other ways. I thought it'd be useful to give another example in which what it leads people to do is not actually be concerned, or it exposes that what their stated objectives are don't align with what would be actually beneficial for the people that they claim to be in favor of. And when we were talking about this podcast previously in preparation, you gave the parallel with the protests that came after the murder of George Floyd. How do you think of that? As what aspects of that are common here, and what are different in terms of the values that are activating people?
I mean, what's different is in that initial incident, it's certainly understandable that of people watching what is it, I forget, it was a 7-minute video of watching that, of thinking, like, this is police misconduct, this is injustice. Even if he had a counterfeit bill, like, the death is not what's warranted, or a proper police reaction. So it was like there's a real injustice here, and you could understand outrage and protest over that. But what was revealing about the protest is that this kind of a nihilism. So just as with what happened in October 7th with Hamas, that your whole orientation towards Israel, and Israel shouldn't retaliate, shouldn't do anything, certainly shouldn't wipe Hamas out of political power and out of Gaza. And then when Israel starts to try to do that, it's all one's attention and outrage is focused on Israel. There's something that, and no focus on Hamas, that's nihilism. It's, you're only focused on the better side, and you just want to tear down the better side. That will accomplish nothing, will indeed just further death and destruction for Israelis and for any better Palestinians in Gaza. If it's like, yeah, let's help Hamas wipe out Israel, that helps nobody but Hamas and killers. And what unfortunately was similar with George Floyd, something like abolish the police as a not reform the police, let's get better policing, let's make sure that this kind of thing can't happen again, or is much less likely to happen. Too many people, that wasn't the reaction. It was, let's get rid of the police. And we saw that sort of trying to play out, say, in neighborhoods in Seattle. That's a nihilism. And it's, again, if you think of it, does it help the people in parts of the U.S. cities where the poorer parts that are probably under-policed or badly policed, but what they need is actual police protection, actual pursuit of the criminals in these neighborhoods, so to render them safer, and for those people who are peaceful, who want to build a life, that they have a better opportunity to do that in a U.S. city. So you would want better policing, not let's get rid of the police, as though that will help people in these neighborhoods. And it's revealing of that's not their actual concern. Their actual concern is to tear down, and to tear down things that are good. Like, the police are essentially good, a needed function, and they play their role well in Western countries. That's not to say that there's not elements that need significant change, but like, if that's your whole orientation, it's a negative, destructive orientation. Abolish the police versus how do we build something better?
So we should start winding down. There are a few other threads that would be good to talk about before we do.
Yeah.
One is Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. I was going to say, I want to talk a little bit more about the hypocrisy issue.
Yeah, I was going to go back to this, and one of the threads that I was interested in is so I put myself through the whole hearing, or most of the hearing that I could take. It's a long, long hearing. And one thing that struck me is that there was a pattern in how the Republican members of Congress versus the Democrat members of Congress approached this issue, and how they questioned the presidents of these universities. And there was a kind of holier than thou attitude from some of the Republicans, like we're you guys are the hypocrites, we know better. And from the Democrats, there was a pattern of understanding and opportunities to explain, and very sympathetic to the presidents. And I wanted to flag something we talked about previously in preparation, which is a real question here about the sincerity of the politicians in this hearing. Is it really an investigation? I didn't find it to be very illuminating in terms of new facts that came out. It was more the politicians lecturing at the presidents and exposing them, or trying to expose them and hold them to loyalty oaths in effect. And do you believe this? And how could you not believe that? So to me, there's a kind of hypocrisy there, which is that is actual hypocrisy there. And I don't think a lot of these politicians really had a view of this issue. And it just struck me as an insincere, in many cases, an insincere attempt to sound better than they actually are. And I think if this goes to Stefanik and some of the others, that if you really were concerned about institutions and parts of our society that are important and not sufficiently critical of anti-Semitism and bigotry more generally, and racism more generally, and sort of the tribal climate that we're living in, if that were really your motive in having this hearing, which I hope that would be the best motive to have for it, there are elements in both parties that are just incredibly bigoted and prejudiced. Why has there been nothing said about that? Why is it that you are picking on the universities and not looking at your own parties? And we've said in other contexts, it was about a year ago that Donald Trump got into a lot of trouble because he hosted both Kanye West and Nick Fuentes, both of whom I think by now most people are willing to accept are racists. And why is that not something that there's a hearing about? Why do you not look at your own party? And the same thing can be said of some of the Democrats who have the so-called squad, and the things they've been saying since October 7th. They're just deplorable. And why is there no one pulling them in and treating them to severe questioning and exposure? So I think that there's definitely, that's not quite the same thing as the pseudo hypocrisy we've been talking about, which has a different source. But there is actual hypocrisy going on, which I think is most evident among the politicians we've been talking about. But why don't you bring up the aspect you're interested in?
Yeah, it relates to that. So I thought the hearings, as many of these hearings are, it's political theater, it's a political farce. It's not an investigation where they're actually trying to figure out something and learn from the witnesses who are testifying. It's usually to berate them and try to expose them. We've seen that when they call the social media CEOs to account. They're not actually trying to learn anything. And here, I don't think they were trying to learn anything. The charge of hypocrisy is, as you said, like sometimes there are hypocrites who they, in some at least semi-honest way, say, these are my principles, this is what I stand for, but they just so glaringly don't live up to it in practice. And people say, well, look, your actions and your conduct don't match what you actually said. But often when you think there's hypocrisy going on, you should think, well, maybe it's because this isn't their actual viewpoint, that what they've said or how it's presented is not actually their viewpoint. And if you understand their viewpoint, they're being consistent with their viewpoint. So I think of someone like Stefanik as, this is not hypocrisy. She does not care about anti-Semitism. So that she gets up there and says, oh, look, I'm crusading for anti-Semitism, and how can you not say that she turns a blind eye, and many people have pointed this out, but as you were talking about, that she's one of the people who turns a blind eye to Donald Trump when he gives a voice to, or gives a kind of public exposure to someone like Nick Fuentes, who's, if he's not an anti-Semite, I don't know who is. She doesn't care, and it's not, oh, I missed that, or I failed to speak, or I didn't. She doesn't actually care about anti-Semitism, and that's the explanation for why she can do what she does. Here, she's scoring points. She's playing to the Republican crowd, and this is a way to get exposure, re-election, campaign for 2024. We're the party who stands against these elites at the universities. That's what's driving her, not I care about anti-Semitism and what's happening on college campuses. So the charge of hypocrisy is not right. And it's important that it's not right, because you can't solve the problem by getting somebody who, well, be more consistent with the ideas. No, there is a consistent viewpoint here that's being put into practice, and it's the viewpoint that's a problem. So similarly, when it's about these presidents, first, the idea that, oh, they're hypocrites, and if we just replace them with a better president who wasn't a hypocrite at the university, that, oh, the issue would go away. It won't go away. That's part of what we've been talking about the whole podcast. It has deep roots in what's being taught at the universities. It's consistent to the egalitarian viewpoint. And the problem then is the egalitarian viewpoint and how much that dominates, and who's willing to challenge that viewpoint, not get a president who is not so hypocritical. In some ways, that could be worse. If you get a president who's, oh yeah, like we really are egalitarian, that's what we're want to really push, the campus will become worse than what it is right now. Because I think many of these presidents are sort of zeros. They're people who are good at compromising with everybody on everything. They don't really have a viewpoint. I think part of what, I think they were startlingly unprepared for the hearing, but I also think that some of the sort of, I don't know what to say, so they don't really know what to say. They don't really have viewpoints. They're not ideologues in the way that many professors at universities are. And if you got a president like that, replacing one of these people, the campus will be worse, not better. And so it's not just, well, the hypocrisy doesn't get it quite right. What it suggests as a solution is not a solution. And that's part of what is so bad about the misconceptualization of it as hypocrisy versus as, no, this is their actual viewpoint. This is what they've been taught. And I think another thing to understand that this is the viewpoint is, again, we've talked about this in another podcast, I think the podcast on anti-Semitism, but the comparison of the Hamas-Israel war and Russia-Ukraine war. So what happened with the Hamas-Israel, and this is what shocked people outside the universities, is they don't care who Hamas is, as long as they can be painted as they're oppressed, they're a victim, they get the moral standing. They get our moral concern. It doesn't matter that they're killers, that they're dictators. It doesn't matter the savagery that they committed in Israel. None of that matters morally to them. And their whole attention is on Israel, and we need to tear down Israel. So they completely blank out that Hamas is evil and that Israel has constructed something good. And their whole focus is on, we want to tear down something good. And then, it's if you get the difference between the sort of reaction in the Western world was horror at what Hamas did in Israel. And on campus, it was the reverse. It seems like they're on the side of Hamas and want to attack Israel. And when you look at what happened with Russia-Ukraine, Russia's evil. It invades Ukraine. The Western world, like a normal person's reaction outside of campus, is to side with Ukraine. And there were widespread calls for, like, should companies still be operating in Russia? Maybe they should withdraw from their business from Russia. And there was like pressure on these companies that, like, maybe that's what morality requires. It's siding with Ukraine against Russia. On campuses, did we see anything like the protest now against Israel, against Russia, and in favor of Ukraine? No. And that's because Ukraine's good. And so why would they have any concern of ours? And they're trying to build something and create they're not just the people that we're going to paint as the oppressed and victims who can't help themselves and can't do anything, and so they get our whole concern. And like that divide between on campus, they don't care about Ukraine, but they want to go after Israel, and that the normal person's reaction is, well, we're on the side of Israel and we're on the side of Ukraine. That tells you something deep about what they've been taught and how they process the world, that they don't care about Russia butchering people. They want to go after Israel, a free country. Like, there's something very warped in their value structure.
We should probably wrap up, but I just want to follow up on one thing you said. So is your point that the behavior of the politicians itself isn't illustrative of hypocrisy, but rather consistent with their value structure, or is it something else? I just want to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's that the hypocrisy for someone with Stefanik would be, look, you're against anti-Semitism and you're rightly going after these college presidents and what's happened on campuses. As how can there be this much anti-Semitism and you guys don't think there's something to do? And even if what to do is not, well, we can say they can't protest or something. It's like, aren't you doing some soul searching by how the viewpoint can be so dominant on your campus? And when you watch the testimony, you don't get any flavor to the presidents are thinking, yeah, like, how can this viewpoint be so common on our university? I think partly they know why it's common, but it's like, so that's if Stefanik was a crusader against anti-Semitism, you could say, yeah, you're doing something good here. You're being inconsistent when you overlook what Trump does and so on. But someone who was trying to be against anti-Semitism, it would really stop them and say, yeah, like, maybe I have turned a blind eye to Trump. Maybe this is part of what has enabled anti-Semitism. The fourth person, I'm forgetting her name, at the hearing, was writing or has written a book on anti-Semitism, and one of her points was, well, it's broader than it's been normalized on broader than campuses, and part of her is like Trump has helped normalize it. And if you were really against it, you would think, yeah, maybe I am being inconsistent, maybe I am being hypocritical, and it would at least get a person to pause. You don't get any sense that she would have a moment's pause, and that tells you, well, maybe it's not that she's her principle is, yeah, I'm against anti-Semitism, but I'm very inconsistent in the application of that principle. That's not what her principle is. That's not what's driving her. And if you then get, yeah, okay, what's driving her is more tribal, then you can explain why she would go after the university presidents and wouldn't care about what the president of the nation does, because he's in her tribe.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because I definitely picked up that the whole feel of the questioning was tribal. It was part of what I was reacting to. And one of the things that I take from Ayn Rand's analysis of tribalism is that it is it is also anti-justice and anti-principle, because it's not about thinking. It's not about evaluating firsthand. We have a view that is what our view is, and we have our enemies and we know what they are, not because of any good reason, but because we've been told that we react negatively to them. And in that sense, it's anti-intellectual in a deep way, in the same, not exactly in the same way, but it's anti-intellectual. And so it's the concerns that they have are not the concerns that you think they have based on what they say. It's a conformity to a tribal agenda in what their authorities tell them, and in a real unthinking hostility. And I think this is why you end up with someone who isn't that sensitive, is not sensitive to their own inconsistency, because there is an inconsistency. It's not like she has a principle that she's trying to live up to. It's like she's not activated by principles. That's another way to put the sort of anti-intellectualism of it. Yeah, okay. That resonates with me, because I was trying to think about how, because I don't think of her as similar to the kind of faculty reaction or the student reaction, which is nakedly envious or egalitarian or nihilistic in the same way. Though I think they do mesh in a certain way when you get to what does tribalism lead to? It does lead to that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's right, and it's important that that's what a better conceptualization would look like, and it clarifies, but it also suggests the solution is not the easy one of let's get rid of this president and get another one. And my worry about donors who I think have rightly been outraged by what's happening on campus, and it's led them to rethink. And again, they're rethinking not from the perspective of free speech, or they're rethinking of, if this is really what's being taught on universities, do I want to support this with millions of dollars? But what I worry is if they don't go deep enough to what's been being taught and kind of accept this characterization that it's hypocrisy and we just need some better people who are less hypocritical, their money will return to the university in a year from now or something. And that the solution, unfortunately, is it's longer term and more drastic than replacing a university president.
Yeah. Well, that touches on something you and I wrote about in an op-ed about a month ago on the reaction of donors and how the issue is deeper than they realize. So we put that in the show notes for people. Thanks everyone for watching today. We're going to draw a line here. We'll be back next week with another episode of New Ideal Live, and I think we are running a monthly Q&A podcast. So if you have questions for us, you can send them to experts@aynrand.org, and we'll filter them into the monthly rotation of that Q&A episode. Thanks for being with us today. We'll be back next time.